In the spring of 1850, America was restless. Gold had been discovered in California just 2 years earlier, and the news traveled faster than law, faster than reason, faster than caution. By the time spring thawed the eastern rivers, thousands of men had already abandoned farms, workshops, and families to chase a rumor of yellow metal in the west. They called it opportunity. Others called it madness. Among those who left was a quiet man from Missouri named Elias Mercer. He wasn't a gambler. He wasn't reckless. He wasn't the kind of man who chased dreams blindly. Elias was 32 years old, a former surveyor, careful with his words and precise with his hands. He had mapped farmland and riverbanks back east. He understood land. He respected it. That would matter later. In April of 1850, Elias joined a small group of 6 prospectors heading toward California. They planned to cross through Nevada territory, what maps barely labeled at the time, and cut south to save weeks of travel. Weeks meant money, and money meant survival. They had heard of a vast stretch of desert called Death Valley. But in 1850, it wasn't yet famous, it wasn't yet feared. It was simply a blank space on a map, and blank spaces are dangerous. The group entered the desert in late May. By then, the air was already thick and heavy. The sun did not simply shine, it pressed down. The earth did not reflect light, it radiated heat. They carried water barrels strapped to mules. They rationed carefully. They moved at dawn and dusk, resting beneath canvas during peak heat. For the first 3 days, everything went according to plan. On the 4th day, one of the mules collapsed. By the 5th, another refused to stand. The desert does not announce when it begins to win. It just waits. On the 6th morning, they realized something was wrong. Their water supply was lower than expected. 1 barrel had leaked overnight. No one knew how long. Panic in the desert spreads faster than fire. Accusations followed. Some wanted to turn back. Others insisted they were too far in. Elias studied the horizon quietly. He believed he could navigate west by landmarks, rock formations, distant ridgelines, the slope of terrain. He had surveyed land before, but he had never surveyed hell. On the 7th day, the group split. 3 men decided to head northeast, believing they were closer to a known trading route. Elias and 2 others chose to continue west. It was not a dramatic moment. No shouting, no final speeches. Just 3 men walking one way, 3 walking another, and the desert swallowing both directions equally. 2 days later, one of the men traveling with Elias collapsed during the afternoon heat. He could not continue. The second man, Thomas Bell, tried to carry him, but the sun was unforgiving. Elias insisted they rest. They had less than a canteen of water remaining between them. By sunset, the fallen man was dead. The desert had claimed its first. Thomas Bell later testified, years afterward, that Elias did something strange that night. Instead of panicking, instead of weeping, Elias studied the stars. He traced patterns with his finger in the air. He whispered calculations under his breath. Then he said something Thomas would never forget. If the land falls westward, there must be runoff somewhere. Even here, Thomas didn't argue. But in the morning, Thomas refused to continue. He believed Elias was walking deeper into death. So he turned south alone, and Elias Mercer walked west, alone, with no water. For 17 days, no one saw him. 17 days in one of the hottest places in North America. No confirmed water sources, no shelter, no supplies beyond what he carried in a small pack. Search parties later found nothing. No body, no bones, no torn fabric, nothing. Thomas Bell barely survived himself. He was rescued weeks later near the edge of the desert, delirious and sunburnt. He told authorities Elias had walked straight into the valley. Like he knew something, Thomas said. But no one believed that. Men did not survive Death Valley without water. Not then, not now. On the 18th day after the separation, a rancher near the California border saw a figure walking down the slope toward his property. The man was barefoot. His boots were tied around his neck. His clothes were sun-bleached and torn. His lips were cracked. His skin was peeling. But he was walking upright. When the rancher approached, the man spoke clearly. "Do you have water?" The rancher would later swear that the man did not appear delirious. He appeared focused. His name was Elias Mercer, and according to every calculation, he should have been dead for over a week. Given water, he drank slowly, too slowly for a dying man. He did not gulp. He did not collapse. He did not cry. He sat beneath the shade of the rancher's porch and asked one question. "What direction does your river run?" Not "where am I?" Not "how long was I gone?" But "what direction does your river run?" The rancher answered, "Southwest." Elias nodded, as if confirming something, as if finishing a calculation. And then he closed his eyes. Not from weakness, from certainty. This is where the mystery truly begins. Because when Elias Mercer recovered, he refused to explain how he survived. He would not describe finding water. He would not describe shelter. He would not describe rescue. He only said, "The land told me where to go." And in 1850, that answer unsettled people. When Elias Mercer walked west alone, the desert did not look hostile. That is the first deception of Death Valley. It does not roar. It does not warn. It simply exists, vast, silent, and patient. The morning he left Thomas Bell behind, the sky was pale and empty. No clouds, no mercy. The ground beneath his boots was a mixture of cracked clay and sharp gravel that reflected heat like a mirror. He carried almost nothing. One near-empty canteen, a small surveying compass, a folding knife, a length of twine, and a notebook. By midday, the canteen was dry. Most men would have panicked. Elias did not. But calm does not stop thirst. Day one alone. The first day without water is physical. Your mouth dries. Your tongue thickens. Your sweat slows. Elias walked at an angle, not straight west, but slightly northwest. Later, when asked why, he would say, "Because valleys collect what mountains give." He had noticed something earlier in their journey. The terrain sloped gently downward toward a wide basin. Most men see flat land in a desert and think it means safety. Elias saw drainage. He believed, perhaps foolishly, that somewhere ahead, storms in distant mountains might have carved temporary channels, dry riverbeds, arroyos, signs of runoff. He walked toward what he believed would be lower ground. The sun reached its peak by early afternoon. Heat shimmered above the ground, bending light. The horizon wavered like a living thing. His shadow grew shorter until it almost disappeared beneath him. He removed his boots not because he was comfortable, but because leather traps heat. He tied them around his neck and walked barefoot over blistering earth. Pain sharpens focus. Day 2. By the second morning, thirst became something else. It was no longer discomfort. It was hunger in reverse, a pulling sensation behind the eyes, a heaviness in the limbs, a ringing in the ears. He began rationing saliva. That sounds strange, but dehydration changes the mind. You swallow less, you breathe through your nose, you avoid speaking, even to yourself. By midday he saw water, a shimmering pool less than 100 yards ahead. He did not run. He closed his eyes, counted to 10, opened them again. The water was gone. A mirage. Most men break at that moment. Direction, slightly. Mirages appear on flat land. He wanted uneven terrain. He walked toward rock formations in the distance. Rocks create shadow. Shadow creates cooler ground. Cooler ground sometimes preserves moisture longer than open earth. Not water, but signs of it. Day 3. The human body begins shutting down on the third day without water. Lips split, skin tightens. Headaches pulse like hammers. Elias found his first sign. It was not water, it was salt. White crusted patterns on dried earth. He knelt slowly and touched the ground. Salt deposits mean standing water once existed, perhaps recently. He followed the pattern, thin lines etched into earth like veins. A dry stream bed. He began walking inside it. Stream beds twist and wind, but they always lead somewhere lower. By evening his legs trembled, uncontrollably. He lay beneath an overhang of rock no larger than a dining table. He did something unusual that night. Instead of trying to sleep, he listened. The desert at night is not silent. Wind moves differently through rock channels. It carries scent. It carries temperature. He pressed his ear to the ground, not because he was delirious, but because surveyors are trained to notice vibrations, subtle shifts in terrain. He felt something faint, not water, but coolness, a draft moving through the ground. Air travels where space exists. Space sometimes exists where water once flowed. He marked the direction with a stone. Day 4. He could no longer sweat. This is dangerous. When the body stops sweating in extreme heat, heat stroke is close. His vision narrowed. Blackness crept in at the corners. He followed the draft. It led him between two rising rock walls, a narrow passage carved by ancient runoff. A canyon. Canyons are survival. They create shade. They create temperature differences. And sometimes they hide water long after the surface dries. He moved slowly inside. Ground changed. From cracked clay to compacted sand. Sand retains moisture longer underground. He knelt, dug with his hands. Nothing. He dug deeper. Still nothing. But the sand beneath the surface was cooler. That meant something. He stopped digging. Digging wastes energy. Instead, he looked upward. High above, he noticed something small. Green, barely visible against stone. A shrub growing from a crevice. Plants do not grow without moisture. He climbed. Slowly. Clumsily. Hands shaking. He reached the shrub and pressed his fingers into the crevice. Damp. Not wet, but damp. He squeezed the soil against his lips. Mud. He did not find water, but he found life. That changed everything. Day 5. Hallucinations began. Not monsters. Not voices. Just memories. Kitchen. Rain on a Missouri roof. The smell of wet earth. Memory is dangerous in dehydration. It makes the present feel unreal. He forced himself to think in numbers, distances, angles, gradients. He calculated slope by eye. Canyons deepened toward basins. He needed to reach the lowest point. If storms had ever passed through, water would settle there, even briefly. By midday, he stumbled into a basin surrounded by steep rock walls, and there he saw birds, 3 of them, circling. Birds do not circle dry ground without reason. He waited. Birds descended, vanished behind rock. He followed. On the far side of the basin, beneath shade, he found it. Not a stream, not a pond, but a shallow depression the size of a wash basin. At the bottom, mud thick enough to hold shape. He dropped to his knees, scooped mud into his mouth, sucked moisture from it, spit grit, repeated. It was not clean, it was not clear, but it was water. Ancient, trapped, hidden in shadow, Enough to continue. Days 6 through 10, he remained near the basin for 2 days, resting in shade, digging deeper at dawn and dusk. Each morning, a thin film of moisture gathered at the lowest point. Condensation from cooler night air. He scraped it with cloth, wringing drops into his mouth. Drops, but drops matter. He rationed movement, only traveling when shadows were longest. He marked direction by stars. North Star steady, Orion's belt rising eastward. He walked by night, rested by day. His body shrank, muscles weakened, but his mind sharpened. Survival became calculation, not hope, not faith, geometry. Basin dried completely. No mud, no birds, no condensation. He had to move. The canyon sloped downward again. Lower ground meant potential groundwater. But lower ground also meant deeper heat. By now, his feet were torn and blistered. He wrapped them with strips torn from his shirt. He walked with measured steps, conserving energy. By afternoon, he collapsed. Not dramatically, just stopped. Lay flat, breathing shallow. He later admitted that this was the closest he came to dying, because he considered staying down. The desert encourages surrender. It whispers, rest. He rolled onto his side instead. Even that small movement saved him, because from that angle, he saw something. A line of darker soil stretching toward the horizon. Barely visible, but different. Darker soil means different mineral content. Sometimes groundwater lies closer beneath such soil. He stood, walked toward it. HR, Day 12. The darker soil led to cracked patterns unlike the rest of the valley. Polygon shapes, like dried lakebed formations. This was once a lake. Seasonal perhaps, but lakes collect runoff. He began digging again. Nothing at first, then dampness. He dug deeper. His hands bled, but the soil grew wetter. Finally, water pooled slowly in the hole, not clean, not flowing, but enough to fill cupped hands. He drank carefully, slowly. He stayed there 2 days, recovering strength, marking stars, studying ridgelines, planning exit. HR, Day 15. He saw mountains ahead. Higher terrain means cooler air. Cooler air means possible springs. Final ascent. Weak, thin, but steady. The slope was brutal. Loose rock, sharp incline. But each step upward lowered temperature slightly. By night, he felt wind. Cool wind. Wind moving from one direction consistently. Wind follows topography. It often follows river valleys. He angled toward where wind seemed to originate. Day 17. At sunrise he crested the ridge, and there, far below, he saw green. Actual green. Trees clustered along a thin, winding line. A river. Not a mirage, not shimmer, but moving water reflecting morning light. He did not run. Running wastes strength. He descended slowly, measured, step by step. By afternoon, he reached it. He knelt, placed both hands into flowing water, and for the first time in 17 days, he allowed himself to close his eyes. When he finally reached the rancher's property the next morning, he had not cheated death. He had calculated his way around it. But when townspeople asked how he survived without water, he never described the mud, the condensation, the digging, the birds. He simply said, "The land told me where to go." And perhaps that was true. By the time Elias Mercer reached what he would later describe only as the basin, the desert had already begun to strip him of everything human. Not just water, not just strength, but identity. Death Valley is not just hot, it is deceptive. From a distance, the valley floor looks smooth, flat, almost calm. But when you walk it, you realize it is a field of salt crust, cracked earth, and hidden sinkholes. The ground cuts your boots, the air bends your vision. The horizon shimmers like water. Cruel, impossible water. By what historians later estimated, Elias would have reached the Central Basin around day 10 or 11, after separating from Thomas Bell. By then, he had finished his last drop of water, and he knew it. He did not panic. That detail bothered people later. Most men in survival accounts describe fear when the last canteen empties. Elias reportedly felt something else. Clarity. Before the gold rush, Elias Mercer had been a land surveyor in Missouri. Surveyors learned 3 important things. Water always leaves evidence. Land always slopes somewhere. Nature is consistent, even when cruel. Death Valley sits below sea level, and basins collect water, even if only briefly, even if rarely. Elias knew that flash floods must pass through here during seasonal storms. If water flowed in, then somewhere, at some time, it must have settled. That thought became his anchor. Without it, he would have died. By midday, the heat reached what modern scientists would later record in the region as well above 120 degrees Fahrenheit, 49 degrees Celsius. The human body begins to fail quickly in those conditions. Sweat stops. The mind fractures. Elias later admitted only once that he saw trees in the distance, green trees, swaying. He walked toward them for nearly an hour. They did not move closer. Finally he stopped. He closed his eyes, and instead of chasing the mirage, he studied the wind. The wind in Death Valley does something subtle. It flows along the shape of the basin. It follows terrain, and terrain follows gravity. If he could read the wind, he could read the slope. That was his logic. Not hope. Logic. Sometime late that afternoon, Elias fell. Not dramatically, not screaming. His legs simply stopped responding. His lips had split open. His tongue felt like sand. He later described the sensation as breathing through wall. His vision narrowed, and for the first time, he considered lying still, letting the sun take him. It would have been easy. No more calculations, no more heat, just silence. But then something strange happened. He heard water. Not imagined rushing river water, but a faint dripping, rhythmic, soft, like moisture striking stone. He forced himself upright, listened again. Was. Drip, drip, drip. He turned toward the sound, and saw nothing. No rock wall, no spring, only cracked earth. The sound continued, and then he realized something chilling. It wasn't outside. It was memory. His brain replaying the sound of runoff from back home. His mind was breaking. Dehydration does not kill immediately. It dismantles. It distorts reality slowly. Elias later refused to describe certain moments, but one journal entry recovered years later from his belongings hinted at something. The desert removes the unnecessary first. Then, it removes what you think is necessary. By day 12 or 13, he began rationing movement itself. Walking only when shadows lengthened. Standing still for long stretches to conserve moisture. Breathing through cloth to reduce evaporation. These are techniques survival experts discuss today. But in 1850, there were no survival manuals. There was only instinct and observation. Near dusk, likely day 13, Elias noticed something subtle. The cracked salt underfoot began changing texture. The crust thinned. The earth beneath felt damp, not wet, but softer. He dropped to his knees, pressed his palm to the ground. It was cooler. That mattered. Cooler meant less direct exposure. Less exposure sometimes meant trapped moisture beneath. He dug with his hands. The salt cut his fingers. His nails split. The soil remained dry. Before. He continued digging until his strength failed. There was no water. But he had learned something critical. Water had been there before. And if it had been there once, it could be somewhere nearby still. The next morning, Elias did something that contradicted basic instinct. Instead of crossing the open basin directly west, he angled toward dark rock formations rising at the valley's edge. Why? Because dark rock absorbs heat. But it also creates shadow, and shadow creates temperature difference. And temperature difference can create condensation. That theory would later astonish modern readers. Was he calculating dew formation? Possibly. Or perhaps he simply needed stone instead of blinding white salt. By afternoon he reached the rocks. They were blistering to the touch, but at their base there was shade, real shade, himself against the stone, and waited. That night he lost consciousness. Whether from heat exhaustion or dehydration, no one knows. What we do know is this: when he woke, it was still dark. The stars were sharp, and the rock beside him felt damp. Not wet, but damp. He pressed his cheek against it. Cool. He ran his fingers along a crack in the stone. And there it was, moisture, barely visible. He licked it, salt. But beneath the salt, water, tiny traces. He spent hours collecting droplets with cloth, wringing them into his mouth. It would not have filled a cup, but it kept him alive one more day. By day 15, Elias was no longer thinking in days. He was thinking in directions. West, downward, shade, wind, slope. But his body was deteriorating rapidly. He removed them, tied them around his neck, wrapped his feet in cloth. Every step burned. He later told no one about the pain. But witnesses who saw his feet weeks later described them as raw meat. And still, he walked, not toward hope, not toward certainty, but toward calculation. Late on what historians estimate was day 16, Elias climbed a low ridge. From its crest, he saw something different. Not water, not trees, but color. A faint line of darker earth beyond the basin. Different soil often means different elevation. Different elevation often means runoff convergence. He began descending toward it. Halfway down, his vision went white. His ears rang. He dropped to his knees, and this time, he did not try to rise. He whispered something no one heard. He later refused to repeat it. Death welcomed it. And then, cloud cover moved across the sun, only briefly, but long enough to drop the temperature slightly, long enough for him to breathe deeper, long enough for him to stand one final time. Instead of heading straight toward the darker soil, he turned slightly southwest. Why? He never explained. But that turn would change everything, because just beyond that ridge was something no one knew existed in that year. A seasonal runoff channel, dry at the surface, but carved deep enough that beneath certain bends, moisture remained trapped under stone. And Elias Mercer walked toward it, barefoot, half-blind, and somehow still calculating. By the time Elias Mercer descended that final ridge, he was no longer walking like a man. He was moving like something pulled forward by instinct alone. His skin had tightened against his bones. His lips were blackened at the edges. His thoughts came in fragments, not sentences. But something inside him, some stubborn, mathematical part of his mind, was still functioning, still calculating, still searching for pattern in chaos. And that is what saved him. At first, the ground beneath him looked no different. Dust, salt, stone. But then he noticed something subtle. The earth changed color, faintly darker, almost gray instead of white. The ground also dipped slightly, forming a shallow, winding groove carved by something long gone. Water, not present, but once powerful enough to shape land. That groove was a seasonal runoff channel, what modern geologists call a wash. In 1850, no one had mapped it, but Elias understood terrain. If rain ever fell in these mountains, even once a year, gravity would force it downward. And water, no matter how scarce, always chooses the lowest path. He dropped to his knees, pressed his ear to the earth, listened. Nothing. But he didn't need to hear water flowing. He only needed proof it had once flowed. Elias staggered toward a bend in the wash. Bends matter. Water slows at bends. Slower water sinks. He chose a point where the channel narrowed between two large rocks. Shade covered part of the ground. The sand there felt cooler. That was enough. He began digging, with his hands. No tools left. No strength left. Just fingers. The sand was dry at first, then slightly compacted, then slightly heavier. Not wet, but different. He dug deeper. His nails tore. Blood mixed with dust. He dug until the hole was nearly the length of his forearm, and then the sand darkened, just slightly. He pressed his palm into it. Cool. He squeezed and felt resistance. Not solid ground, but moisture held in sediment. He lowered his face to the hole and waited. It took time, minutes, maybe longer. But slowly, water began seeping inward, not flowing, seeping. Tiny beads forming in the base of the hole. Elias did not drink immediately. That part matters. A dying man gulps. A thinking man waits. He allowed the hole to fill, a shallow pool no larger than a tin cup. Then he cupped his hands, drank. It would not have been clean. It would not have been fresh. It would have tasted of salt, minerals, and dust. But it was water. Enough to restart organs. Enough to clear his thoughts slightly. Enough to keep him alive. He waited again. More seeped in. He drank again. And for the first time in days, Elias Mercer believed he might survive. Water alone was not enough. Exposure would still kill him. He examined the wash more carefully. Upstream, if you could call it that, the channel narrowed further between higher rock walls. Rock walls create shade longer into the day. Shade preserves moisture, and moisture preserves life. He moved slowly through the shallow channel, following it until he found something remarkable. A shallow overhang. Not a cave, not large enough to stand, but deep enough to shield him from direct sun. Bore faint mineral streaks, pale lines running downward. Evidence of past water flow. He placed his palm against one streak. It felt slightly cooler than surrounding stone. He understood what that meant. At night, when temperatures dropped sharply, as they do in deserts, condensation would form along that rock face. Tiny amounts, but enough. That night, Elias did something extraordinary for 1850. He used cloth from his shirt and laid it across the rock surface. When temperatures fell, the stone radiated heat away rapidly. Moisture from the air condensed along the cooler surface. The cloth absorbed it. He wrung it into his mouth, again and again. Each time only drops, but drops become mouthfuls. Mouthfuls become strength. Strength becomes survival. He repeated this for 2 nights. By the 3rd morning, he could stand without shaking. During those days, the desert stopped feeling like an enemy. That sounds poetic. But multiple later accounts describe Elias speaking about the land not as something to defeat, but something to read. He stopped fighting it, stopped crossing open ground blindly, stopped chasing distance. Instead, he moved from shade to shade, from rock to rock, following the wash downward. Because water carves toward lower ground, and lower ground leads somewhere. He didn't know where, but somewhere is better than nowhere. Survival stories often focus on physical endurance, but Elias's greatest battle was mental. In extreme dehydration, hallucinations intensify. He later admitted to seeing figures walking along ridgelines, not threatening, just watching. He never confirmed whether they were illusions. He also described hearing wind that spoke in direction. Listeners might call that delirium. But consider this. Wind in a basin does shift based on elevation. It does indicate slope. What sounds mystical may have been instinct interpreting subtle environmental cues. He wasn't hearing voices. He was decoding terrain. After what historians estimate was 2 to 3 days near the wash, Elias made a decision. He would not remain. The moisture was too limited. The wash must lead somewhere, either to a larger basin or toward mountain foothills. He chose to follow it southwest. Why southwest? Later map comparisons suggest that direction would gradually rise toward lower mountain passes, where runoff would eventually converge into more permanent water systems near California ranchlands. He could not have known that with certainty, but he could observe slope. The ground beneath him was no longer flat salt crust. Upward, subtly, almost invisibly. But upward meant toward edges. Edges meant escape. By now his feet were destroyed, blistered beyond recognition. He tore more fabric to wrap them. Every step left faint blood marks in dust, and yet he continued. Not fast, not strong, but steady. He moved mostly at dawn and dusk, rested during peak heat beneath whatever shadow he could find, collected minimal moisture at night, dug shallow seep holes whenever sand darkened. He had transformed from a lost prospector into something else, a desert reader. On what was likely day 17, he crested a low rise, and in the distance, not a mirage, not shimmering illusion, but real contrast. Low scrub vegetation, small, sparse, but undeniably alive. Plants mean roots, roots mean groundwater, and groundwater means survival. Began walking toward it. Slowly, carefully, half expecting it to disappear like the trees before. It did not. By late afternoon, he reached the edge of it. He fell to his knees, pressed his hands into soil. It was damp, not soaked, but damp enough to confirm. He was near the boundary of Death Valley. Near enough that groundwater tables rose slightly closer to the surface. Near enough that ranch land was within walking distance. The final miles were not dramatic. No collapse, no storm, no miracle. Just a man walking, barefoot, silent, calculated, toward a horizon that no longer shimmered falsely. When the rancher first saw him descending that final slope, Elias Mercer was not staggering wildly. He was walking straight, deliberate, eyes forward, like a man finishing a journey he had already mapped in his mind. How he survived without water. Elias never claimed a miracle. He never claimed divine intervention. He never claimed secret springs. He simply said, "The land falls where it must. I followed that." To people in 1850, that sounded cryptic. To modern survival experts, it sounds plausible. But here is the unsettling part. Maps from that period show no recorded water source in that exact wash. No known seasonal channel documented. No mention of that runoff path until decades later. Which means Elias either discovered something no one had recorded, or he read terrain at a level most men never learned. And yet, there are still inconsistencies. Small details he refused to clarify. Moments he would not describe. Including one night in the wash, when he reportedly said, I was not alone. When Elias Mercer reached the ranch house near the California border, he should have become famous. A man walking out of Death Valley after more than 2 weeks without a water supply? In 1850, that was not survival. That was impossibility. But Elias did not behave like a man who wanted attention. He behaved like a man who wanted silence. The rancher who found him, a cattleman named Daniel Reeves, later described Elias as not broken, but changed. His body was ravaged. His feet were torn raw. His hands were shredded from digging. His lips were cracked so deeply they bled when he spoke. But his eyes? Clear. Not wild, not confused, not delirious. Clear. He drank water slowly, a sip at a time. Anyone who has studied dehydration knows this is critical. Too much water too fast can kill. But in 1850, most men didn't know that. How did Elias? Word traveled quickly through nearby settlements. Prospectors came to see him, men who had lost friends in that same valley, men who had turned back in fear. They all asked the same question: how did you find water? Elias's response never changed: I followed where the land falls. That answer frustrated people. It sounded poetic, vague, like something a preacher might say. But he was not a poetic man. Those who knew him back in Missouri described him as practical to the point of bluntness. So why speak in riddles now? 3 days into his recovery, while sitting under the porch shade, Elias said something unexpected. Daniel Reeves later recalled it clearly. Elias stared toward the distant desert and murmured, I was not alone out there. Reeves asked him what he meant. Did he encounter another traveler? A native? Guide? Bandits? Elias shook his head slowly. No, he said. Not that. He refused to elaborate. And from that moment on, whenever someone asked about the deeper parts of his journey, the nights in the wash, the hallucinations, the final ridge, he would close the conversation. Years later, after Elias had moved north and abandoned prospecting entirely, a small leather-bound notebook was found among his belongings. It contained rough sketches of terrain, slope markings, wind arrows, rock formations. But several pages had been torn out, not lost, removed deliberately. The remaining pages included fragmented lines. Wind shifts at night. Stone sweats before dawn. Sound travels differently in the basin. Movement on the ridgeline, not wind. That last line unsettled historians. Movement on the ridgeline, not wind. What did he see? Extreme dehydration causes hallucinations, visual distortions, auditory illusions, even the sensation of presence. Modern survival psychology calls it third man syndrome, the feeling that someone unseen is guiding or accompanying you during life-threatening isolation. Mountaineers have reported it. Polar explorers have reported it. Even astronauts have described similar sensations during isolation training. Could Elias have experienced that? It's possible. But here's what complicates the theory. Elias was not a mystical man. He did not speak of spirits. He did not credit angels. He did not claim divine rescue. He did not even call it a vision. He simply said, I was not alone. Not emotionally, not spiritually, physically. That's what disturbed people. There is another theory. Long before settlers crossed that desert, native tribes understood its hidden pathways. The Timbisha Shoshone people lived in and around what is now known as Death Valley for centuries. They knew seasonal water pockets, rock seeps, hidden springs. It is possible Elias encountered someone who observed him from a distance, guided him subtly, left signs, perhaps even led him toward the wash without direct contact. But no tribal record mentions assisting a lone prospector that year, and Elias never described meeting anyone. Still, the line in his journal remains: movement on the ridgeline, not wind. Was someone watching him, protecting him, Or was his mind fighting collapse? One of the strangest parts of Elias Mercer's story is this: he never went west again. Not for gold, not for land, not even for curiosity. After recovering, he abandoned the gold rush entirely. He moved north into Oregon Territory, became a land surveyor again, married, lived quietly. When asked about California, he would change the subject. When asked about the desert, he would grow still. Once, according to a neighbor's letter written in 1863, Elias responded sharply to a young man boasting about crossing Death Valley. He said, "You do not conquer that place. You survive it once. That is all." There was no pride in his voice, only warning. There is one more inconsistency historians struggle with. Based on distance estimates and his physical state, Elias should have lost more weight than witnesses described. He was thin, yes, weak, yes, but not skeletal, not dying. That suggests something important. He did not spend 17 days completely without water. He found small, repeated sources, seeps, condensation, subsurface moisture, enough to stabilize, which means his survival was not luck, it was method. And method requires clarity. But clarity and dehydration rarely coexist, unless he was not as alone as we assume. Near the end of his life, sometime in the late 1870s, Elias reportedly told his son a single sentence about the desert. His son later shared it with a local historian. "You listen. That's all. Not whether you're strong, not whether you're brave, but whether you listen." To what? Wind, slope, stone, or something unseen? We will never know. Today, Death Valley is mapped, measured, studied. Modern survival experts analyze Elias Mercer's journey as an early example of terrain-based survival logic. Follow gravity, seek shade, dig in bends, collect condensation, move at dusk. It is possible, even probable, that everything he did can be explained by intelligence and instinct. But what cannot be fully explained is this: why did he refuse to describe certain nights? Why tear pages from his journal? Why insist he was not alone? And why did a man who once chased gold never chase anything again? The desert gave him back to the world, but it took something with it. By the time Elias Mercer died in the late 1870s, his story had already begun to change. Not wildly, not dramatically, but subtly. Each retelling added emphasis. Some called him the man who crossed the valley dry. Others said the man who drank nothing for 17 days. A few even claimed he survived without water at all. But legends grow in silence, and Elias left plenty of silence behind. Now, more than 175 years later, we are left with one central question. Was his survival a miracle, a misunderstanding, or the result of extraordinary observation? Let's examine what remains. The scientific reality of Death Valley. Today we know a great deal about Death Valley. It is one of the hottest places on Earth. Summer temperatures regularly exceed 120 degrees Fahrenheit, 49 degrees Celsius. The valley floor sits below sea level. Rainfall averages less than 2 inches per year. But here's what many whistle. People don't realize. Death Valley is not lifeless. It contains seasonal runoff channels, washes, rock seeps, temporary groundwater pockets, condensation-prone canyon walls, flash flood pathways that carve hidden moisture traps. Modern survival experts confirm something important. If you understand desert hydrology, and if you move intelligently, it is possible to extract small amounts of water from unlikely places. Not enough to thrive, but enough to survive. Elias Mercer did not survive because the desert was merciful. He survived because he treated the desert like a map. Theory 1. Terrain intelligence. The most grounded explanation is this: Elias read slope and wind patterns with unusual skill. As a former surveyor, he understood that water always flows downhill. Bends. Darker soil may indicate past moisture. Rock faces can produce condensation during rapid temperature drops. His techniques, digging at a bend in a wash, collecting moisture from stone, traveling at dusk, align closely with what survival instructors teach today. If that's the case, then Elias Mercer was not superhuman. He was observant. But that raises another question. Why didn't the other men survive? Because panic blinds logic. And Elias did something rare in life-or-death conditions. He did not rush. He calculated. Theory 2, the Indigenous Knowledge Hypothesis. Before prospectors ever crossed that valley, native tribes, particularly the Timbisha Shoshone, lived in and around the region for generations. They understood the valley's rhythms. They knew hidden springs. They knew which rock faces wept moisture at dawn. Suggest Elias may have been guided, not rescued directly, but observed. Perhaps someone saw him digging in the wash. Perhaps subtle signs were left. Perhaps he followed footprints without realizing it. But there is no written record confirming this, and Elias never admitted meeting anyone. Still, his journal line remains, movement on the ridgeline, not wind. Was that hallucination, or was someone making sure he moved in the right direction? We cannot know. Theory 3, Third Man Syndrome. Psychologists studying extreme survival situations have documented something fascinating. In life-threatening isolation, many survivors report sensing a presence, an unseen companion, a guide, someone walking beside them. This phenomenon is often called Third Man Syndrome. It has been reported by polar explorers, shipwreck survivors, P-Cell, mountaineers on Everest, P. Soldiers in extreme combat isolation, P. The presence feels real, protective, guiding, but it is a psychological response to stress and neurological strain, P. Could Elias have experienced this? Possibly. But here's the difference. Most survivors describe the presence as comforting. Elias described something else. He said, I was not alone. Not, I felt someone. Not, I imagined someone. He stated it as fact. That distinction is subtle, but powerful. H2, Theory 4, the legend expanded. Another possibility is simpler. Perhaps the story grew. Perhaps he had slightly more water than reported. Perhaps the time estimates were wrong. Perhaps he encountered a small spring not documented. Perhaps exhaustion exaggerated the timeline. In frontier America, storytelling traveled faster than documentation, and survival stories attracted attention. But here's what complicates that theory. Elias never sought fame. He avoided attention. He left the gold rush. He refused interviews beyond basic details. He tore pages from his own journal. Men who fabricate survival legends usually repeat them proudly. Elias avoided repeating his. The geography today. Modern maps of Death Valley do show seasonal washes in areas that match rough descriptions of his route. Some include narrow channels carved by flash floods, areas where sediment traps subsurface moisture, rock faces capable of condensation at night. Survival instructors who have retraced similar terrain confirm. A skilled, patient individual could extract minimal water in those areas, but it would require knowledge, calm, thinking, physical endurance, and a refusal to surrender. And that is rare. What changed in him? The most compelling mystery is not how he survived. It is what survival did to him. Before the desert, Elias chased gold. After the desert, he chased nothing. Before, He believed land was something to measure. After, he believed land was something to listen to. He never returned to prospecting, never crossed that basin again. When asked about bravery, he reportedly said, "It was not bravery, it was attention." Attention to slope, to wind, to shadow, to silence, and perhaps to something else. The final mystery. In 1878, shortly before his death, Elias was asked one last time by a local historian, "Did you truly find water out there?" He paused for a long time, then answered, "Yes." The historian followed up, "Where?" Elias smiled faintly. "Where it falls." That was it. No coordinates, no map, no boast. Just a man who understood gravity, and perhaps understood something about fear that most of us never will. So what really happened? Let's be honest with your audience. There are only 3 realistic possibilities. He survived through extraordinary terrain intelligence. He received subtle guidance he never disclosed. His mind fractured, and that fracture helped him survive. None of those require the supernatural. But none fully erase the mystery either. Because survival is not always about strength. Sometimes it is about stillness. Sometimes it is about observation. And sometimes it is about refusing to panic when panic feels natural. The desert's final lesson. Death Valley does not forgive mistakes. It does not reward arrogance. It does not care about ambition. But it does follow rules. Gravity, shadow, wind, temperature, pattern. Elias Mercer did not conquer the desert, he obeyed it. And that may be the only reason he walked out alive. If this story reached you, ask yourself something. In a world that moves fast and loud, are you listening to the terrain beneath your own feet? Because sometimes survival, in deserts and in life, comes down to whether you notice where the land falls.